The BBC Director General and Head of News, they both resign in disgrace. It's true. Totally disgraceful. This dude needs to get a life. Oh my gosh. I've thought about him and studied him more than anybody else in the world. What an admission to make that. You're obsessed. You've got TDS on the brain. You're like an addict. President Trump is filing this one claim against all of you for $5 billion just in count one, including punitive damages out of that booty. $10 billion is what President Trump is demanding from the BBC after they smeared and defamed him by cutting out like 50 pages of his speech to just try to connect two sentences to say, we're going down and we're going to fight to take over the Capitol. All rigged. So he's now suing them. You can see it's a 33-pager. President Donald Trump as an individual suing the BBC. And they've got two counts, $5 billion apiece. And I hope I get it. This action is about a false and defamatory and deceptive, disparaging, inflammatory, and malicious depiction of President Trump. They put it in a stupid documentary called Panorama, completely fabricated. They released it 1 week before the 2024 presidential election to try to rig the election in more ways than one. Now, in this documentary, it was called Trump, A Second Chance. First broadcast 10/28/24, the BBC intentionally and maliciously sought to fully mislead its viewers around the world. They spliced together two separate parts of Trump's speech on J6. They took like the first sentence, cut out dozens of pages, and then took that last sentence and they just smashed them together to mislead its viewers, deliberately omitting critical parts of his speech. Now, what they did is they wrote in their little documentary that Trump said this: we're going to walk down to the Capitol and I'll be there with you. And we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. But guess what? Trump never uttered this sequence of words. They spliced it together. Completely fabricated. They say Trump actually said this. Full remarks are here. Now it's up to Congress to confront this assault on our democracy. After this, we're going to walk down. I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. Anyone you want, but I think right here, we're going to walk down to the Capitol and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them, but I said something's wrong here. Something's really wrong, can't have happened, and we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. So what did the scum BBC do? They purposely omitted this, saying less than 1 minute after this, they put in another sentence. I know that everyone here will be marching down. And we saw that they made him say something that they didn't. They spliced together footage. They took the very start of the speech, and then 55 minutes later, at the very end of the speech, they took another sentence. They omitted a statement where he said he was calling for peace. He said, we're going to go down and urge our senators on, but peacefully. This was a distortion and materially misled their viewers. And so there were concerns about this. Wild. So even in the BBC, concerns were raised internally before we did this. They said, feels a little bit dishonest and defamatory to doctor his speech to make him say that they're going to go attack the Capitol. But BBC ignored these concerns, didn't take any corrective action. This instance of doctoring in the form of distortion of meaning and splicing words together is part of a pattern that they engaged in. And when they got caught, faced with enormous and overwhelming outrage, one of the journalists apologized, but has made no showing of actual remorse for any of its wrongdoing. Yeah, she resigned. She's like, I stand by the BBC, but I don't want to be a distraction. So I'll just resign and ride off into the sunset. Now, we know these parties: President Trump, the president, America's favorite president, BBC, British corporation, other studios, BBC studios. All this should be happening in Florida. That's where Trump is located. They also offer subscriptions to people in Florida. They've purposely availed themselves of this forum. And so we can sue in Florida. That's where we're at. Now, the documentary was also available to people in Florida. You can have a BritBox subscription, whatever that is. Sounds terrible. And according to VPN Mentor, there was a lot of demand for this. Florida streamers, a lot of people were talking about this in Florida, so we can sue right here. And people use VPN services to watch these things anyways, even if it's region locked. I think they were saying that this is region locked to BBC, but people use VPNs to go get it. And other organizations distributed it outside of BBC. So another company called Blue Ant was distributing this. So the documentary was everywhere, even if you couldn't access it directly on the BBC without trying to, finagle some things around. Moreover, as plainly seen at the very beginning of this, film crew contracted by the BBC producers went over to Florida. They recorded Florida. They've got people who are in the documentary staking out Mar-a-Lago to record footage for B-roll footage. Documentary contains extensive evidence and examples. They specifically went to Mar-a-Lago. They used a wide-angle aerial view of Mar-a-Lago. They had another viewpoint of Atlantic Ocean, 5 minutes. Okay, all this footage. They're in Florida. That's why we're suing him here. 403, Mar-a-Lago. 451, Rick Frazier. 503, Frazier walking into Mar-a-Lago, and so on and so on. So venue is proper in Florida, and that's why we're suing you here. Now, here are some more facts. The spliced together version of Trump's remarks made it wrongly appear that he said we're going to go attack the Capitol. Completely fabricated. exaggerated. What he actually said was this. We already read it. And the BBC was malicious. And we know more about this because the BBC Director General and Head of News, they both resign in disgrace. It's true. Totally disgraceful. Deborah Turnus, she resigned in disgrace after this came out. Also, on November 9th, Trump and their counsel emailed a letter to the chairman and their lawyer saying, you better retract these things. Enclosed with the letter was a letter of apology from Chairman Shah. Yeah, so Trump got an apology. He says, let me address immediately your speech. The way the speech was edited was false and misleading. The editing unintentionally created the impression of a single, continuous section of your speech rather than excerpts. This gave the mistaken impression, wow, making admission right there, rather than a mistaken impression that you made a direct call for violent action. They were such liars about the J6. It's like a tentpole hoax for them, but liars. They said this. You've got guys like Rob Reiner, John Brennan, James Clapper, all saying that Trump had the Russians help him. All fake. They all made it up. They were not helping the president. Not in evidence. That was an editorial error, and it should not have happened. I have stated clearly and publicly that we apologize for that error of judgment. Yeah, it was a bad decision. As it was your speech that was edited in a misleading way, and you were the object of that, I would also like to apologize to you, Mr. President, directly for this mistake. Boom, admitted everything they did. So the BBC then published the following letter. Trump's lawyers are like, great, error of judgment. Thank you for admitting what you did. Somebody screwed up there. They made a bad error of judgment. It wasn't a mistake. It was a volitional error. So contrary to the claim that this was an unintentional editorial error, like some moron editor who can't edit videos was like just accidentally deleted 55 minutes of his entire speech. Like, oh, we don't need this. I thought it would be deleted for conciseness. Yeah. They said in the framing, said he called for violent actions and attacks. He didn't. Now, as a matter of common sense, let's just think about it, says Trump's lawyers, asking for $10 billion. It would have been impossible for BBC's journalists and producers to splice together two distinct parts of a 55-minute speech unless they were acting intentionally. You just don't cut out the 55-minute bulk of the speech. Such a dramatic distortion could never have occurred by accident. Two distinct parts of the speech from nearly 55 minutes apart do not inadvertently become spliced together. Who did that? Who was the editor who made that decision? Or the boss who approved the editor to cut that out? In parallel, by definition, an error of judgment, as admitted, is not inadvertent, and it includes unintentional acts. That's why it's bad to make those public apologies public. You got to be very careful in those statements because Trump's lawyers just came out and they said, oh, apology accepted, but thank you for admitting that you did something worse. We're going to sue you now. So the BBC's actual malice, since it was a judgment error, is further compounded by its prior act that unequivocally demonstrates the organization has been anything but fair to President Trump. We've got a long history of this. They've been consistently dishonest. The journalists and the producers knew what they were doing and they published it anyways. Oh, maybe we have the name. Michael Prescott, a journalist who until June 2025 was an independent advisor. He was there. They sent an internal memo to the BBC board. So Michael Prescott, he said, hey guys, he sent a memo to his bosses. There is serious bias in our reporting. The memo leaked back in early 2025. He highlighted a litany of disturbing misconduct demonstrating, shout out to Prescott, man, or Prescott, I don't know how he pronounces it, demonstrating how far the BBC has strayed from accepted standards of journalistic integrity, including but not limiting to the tampering with Trump's speech. Now, he's nonpartisan, he says. He wrote in his memo, yeah, I think it's important to state I've never been a member of any political party, don't really have any views. My views on the BBC's treatment of subjects covered below don't come with an agenda. What motivated me here is despair. Inaction is happening at the BBC. We bring issues to light, they don't care. On no other occasion in my personal life, says this guy, have I witnessed what I did with the BBC with regard to how management dealt with or failed to deal with serious problems. I watched the program, he writes, Panorama. I found it to be neither balanced nor impartial. It seemed to be taking a distinctly anti-Trump stance. Critics of the Republican candidate vastly outnumbered those who argued for him. What examination there was of the reasons for Trump's popularity seemed to me to be insufficient given the balance of the programs. So they're like ripping him and they're like, well, but some people like him. Given what I took to be the anti-Trump nature of the program, I of course assumed there would be a similar balancing of the program to go after Kamala Harris, but I remain shocked that there was not. Prescott was not alone. He said, I raised my concerns with another senior editor over there called David Grossman. He concluded the main contributions were weighed against Trump, but worse, he highlighted alarming concerns about how Panorama edited the speech. This created an impression that Trump did something he didn't do. And he concluded that the editing of the speech was one of the most shocking sets of issues uncovered during my time. If journalists are allowed to edit video in order to make people say things they never actually said, why should the BBC be trusted? Where will this all end? Well, hopefully they have to pay $10 billion and that's the end of the company. One way to end it. As further revealed by The Telegraph, the BBC also aired similarly doctored footage on Newsnight. Same thing, fake speech spread all over the news. Trump really said something differently that they cut out. Now, immediately after the BBC episode aired, Mick Mulvaney, a former White House acting chief of staff, both individually voiced their concerns. They said, you guys guys are liars, man. Just straight up liars. Mr. Chador specifically told the Telegraph he was present for discussions after the clip was aired, and they all sat around. They dismissed any ethical concerns about the airing of the clip. They're like, well, I mean, he did say those things 55 minutes apart, but he did say them. Yeah, that's right, he did. Mr. Mulvaney expressed his concern on air while being interviewed on air on Newsnight. He says, your video actually spliced together the presentation. He said, we're going to go down and cheer on our senators. And then it actually goes on to say, and we fight like hell. But you make it look like those two things were said back to back, and it was malicious. Clive Coleman, another legal affairs correspondent, says, I really struggle to understand how we got to this place. The first lesson almost you're taught as a broadcast journalist is that you do not join two bits of footage together from different times in a way that will make the audience think it's one piece of footage. Like, it's basic journalist school. And also revealed by the Telegraph, the BBC has already admitted to misleading viewers by claiming that Trump called for one of his leading critics to be shot in the face. They just make it up. This admission by the BBC about 3 instances of false statements shows there's a pattern here, and the memo that's now been released shows that they weren't even trying. Telegraph described it, and that was that Liz Cheney comment. Like, Trump wants Liz shot in the face. In fact, Trump had accused Cheney of being a radical war hawk, and Cheney's always like, we should send troops everywhere to Ukraine, to Putin, stop Putin. Trump said, let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her face, okay? Let's see how she feels about it then, when she's on the front line. Always easy to armchair quarterback the deployment of American men and women when you don't have to go and have any skin in the game. That's what Trump was saying, and it's damn right. That should apply to all of our congresspeople who are willingly ready to sacrifice American blood and treasure for God knows what. This false, defamatory, and malicious coverage is consistent with their modus operandi, and they have not made even a plausible attempt at objective journalism. To maintain even a slight semblance of objectivity, they have no regard for the truth. It was malicious and doctored, all in an attempt to create a one-sided impression and narrative against Trump. Now, by any measure, there was overwhelming ratio of anti-Trump versus pro-Trump commentary, and there's supposed to be a government independent news operation that's fair. The BBC's aggressive anti-Trump stance is reflected straight away. They have an intro, runs for almost 3 minutes. Rick Wilson, he's written 2 books criticizing Trump, and I think he's a part of the Lincoln Project that had a problem with like young boys and somebody on their leadership team. Has called the president the devil, a cult leader, as his organization had PDF files running around it. I'm the leading anthropologist of Donald Trump in the world, probably. This dude needs to get a life. Oh my gosh. I've thought about him and studied him more than anybody else in the world. What an admission to make that. You're obsessed. You've got TDS on the brain. You're like an addict, basically. Seconds later, Wilson states of Trump, when you let the monster escape, it's going to come back and it's going to rule every damn whore in the movie industry. Other people were there. Robert Reich, they were just trashing him the entire documentary. You get the point. Towards the end, Reich compares Trump to Adolf Hitler. Oh, of course, which rises to defamation itself. Jared Huffman calls Trump a cult leader. It's like TDS pornography for them. Honestly, it's like a joke. They all sit around and they watch it and they like, enjoy themselves. No less an authority. Prime Minister Liz Truss discussed the bias. And so now they're saying enough of this. You guys are monsters. Since its publication, the Panorama documentary's got a bunch of traction. A lot of libs really love it. Damage to Trump's personal brand alone, billions of dollars, tens of billions. And all of these businesses were making millions on the back of this smear. This is serious injury, and that's why we're suing. Now, the damages take the form of direct harm to his occupational interests, brand, properties, and all the things, and they exacerbated it. So we're now saying that this is defamation per se. You were acting with malice, and you were making statements about things that he did that are on its face false and defamation, including all of the statements. You maliciously perverted the speech for your little documentary. There was no factual basis for this. It was deceptive and defamatory. This was not a continuation of a prior broadcast. This was a whole new project set up with some of the biggest Trump haters on the planet. They had actual malice in publishing this. They knew that it was false. They knew they cut out 55 minutes of appropriate context. And so this is defamation, and now you're being sued. President Trump is filing this one claim against all of you for $5 billion just in count 1, including punitive damages out of that booty. We've also got Florida Deceptive and Unfair Trade Practices Act saying you're being sued under this too. Unfair practices. You omitted Trump's speech, cut it, and were perverting your work products like a false product. And for that, $5 billion. Now we're sending this in courtesy of Alejandro Brito, a name we've seen many times before here, on behalf of the president with some others, pro hoc vice. He's coming in, Epstein and co. Perfect. So sending this one in to the Florida court, BBC, now going to be on the hook for $10 billion. And honestly, I hope he gets it. It's like, I don't think that he will get $10 billion, but there need to be consequences for this. What is the only consequence for these people who thus far have lived in impunity and immunity for all of their slanderous lies? The only penalty, you fire them, but then they go and they get a job somewhere else. else, probably getting more money for continuing their lies. So the only way you can stop this is with financial penalties and punitive damages coming out of the BBC. They made an apology. They screwed that up too, made an admission in it. And now Trump has a solid claim. We'll see what happens in Florida. Welcome to America. We're not in England anymore. And so you have to be accountable for your malicious and slanderous lies. We'll keep our eye on this one and hopefully have the president receiving a $10 billion check from the BBC soon.